Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. We're gathered here to spend about an hour getting to know a little bit more about Reverend Craig as he candidates for the role of moderator of MCC. I am the Reverend Dr. Tijuana Gray, and it has been my honor to serve as the chair of the moderator nominating committee. And this evening, I get to play host for this session. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. You will notice that you are not able to unmute yourself at will. That is controlled by all of the hosts and co-hosts here. So when it is time for you to ask a question, you will be invited to unmute at that time. And as a note, Reverend Craig also does not have the ability to unmute himself. So if he does happen to get muted at some point, it may take an extra moment to unmute him. So just so that doesn't count as a mark against him and his use of technology. That's all of us trying to manage all of the bits and pieces. When we do get to the Q&A, if you have your camera on and it's your turn to ask a question, we will be spotlighting you. If your camera's not on, we won't be able to do that. We'll just listen very carefully. Hopefully, by now you've all selected your primary language. If you have not, please go ahead and do so. Even if this session is being live interpreted into Spanish, German, and Portuguese. I did it. If English is your primary language, you still need to select English so that if the interpreters start talking, you will hear English. So click on the more in the bottom of your Zoom window and follow interpreter and interpretation and language. So hopefully everyone has found that, or will find it in the next moment or so. This is the fourth time that we've had time with Reverend Craig, so we're sort of monitoring to not have to repeat a lot of what has already been done. So if you have a question that you don't get a chance to ask, it's possible that it was answered in one of the 3 previous sessions. Kim is going to drop the links to all of those recordings into the chat. She's also going to share a link to a document that was created with the leftover questions that didn't get answered live in those sessions. So among those 4, a lot of questions have already been answered. I think that's everything I wanted to say to get us started. There may be a little bit more later, but let's all join together in the spirit of prayer as we open this session. Holy One, we give thanks to you for this time together, for your call on this denomination. We ask that you continue to make your will and your mission known to us. Guide our hearts and our minds to be open to what you would have us to do. In this time of discernment, let your spirit be the center. Let your spirit give us the teaching, the will, the knowledge to make the right decisions for this denomination's future. In this time, in this session, we ask God that you will give Reverend Craig the words that he needs to say. Give us the questions that we need to ask. And give us all ears and hearts to listen to one another and to you. In all your many holy names we pray. Amen. Now I am going to turn this over to the man of the hour who is going to make a presentation. Take it away, Reverend Craig.
Well, thank you everybody for taking the time out of your day to join us for this town hall. And I am grateful to have an opportunity to speak to everybody. I put together just 3 slides with the able help of some folks on the MCC staff. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about those elements because they've come up in all of the webinars and the written questions that we received. So Tammy, if you want to show those slides. And the first slide addresses Next slide, Tammy. The first slide addresses a question that I received individually, and it's about my commitment to our international church presence. And I want to make very clear, I am very committed to growing our international churches and being supportive and innovative in leading our denomination and assisting all of our churches across the world in growing and expanding their ministry in the context in which we find them. And I think we also need to be clear. I know it sounds like I talk about the US churches a lot, and I do that for a reason that I'm not suggesting I don't want to support international churches. I will absolutely put forward significant energy and effort to do that. We also need to just be grounded in the truth that what pays for our denomination are our US churches. It pays for our denominational staff. It pays for the moderator's salary. It pays for everything, most everything. And we need to make sure that our U.S. churches are supported and growing so that we have the resources to support and grow our international churches. We can do more than one thing at a time. And I think that supporting our international churches starts by stabilizing our U.S. church base. Next slide, please, Tammy. I also want to mention that when we started our moderator forums, we had 91 churches in the US. And you've heard me say that in my introductory video and then in some of the other webinars. Today, we actually have 90 churches. We lost a church off of our rolls, but we didn't just lose that church off of our rolls. We actually lost that church in 2020. And it may cause you to ask, how is it that we didn't know a church closed 5 years after it closed? It's because we do not have the kind of in-depth relationships that we really need to have with our local congregations. And it's one of the reasons why I say I need to reach out. If I were honored enough to be elected moderator, if that's the discernment and movement of the Holy Spirit across the body of MCC, it's so important that we be present with our local churches so we have those relationships. Next slide. And then the last thing I want to say before I get to your questions, I believe that in large measure, this election is about a vision and a focus. And my vision is very simple. It's staying attuned to the Spirit in growing our denomination to be a vibrant and a growing church where we express radical inclusivity, a progressive theology, where we lean deeply into our social justice history, and we connect with a changing landscape of religion across the world. And we can do that. We can do that. We have done it before. We can do it again. But we have to stay focused on supporting churches across the world in the context in which they find themselves. And that's what I'm committed to, both through support and through innovation. So I wanted to just touch base with those three things before we got to your questions. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all today.
Thank you, Reverend Craig. Before we start taking questions, I forgot that part of the logistics. If you would please, if you have a question, type it in the chat and send it to me. You will find I have MNC in the front of my name, which should help you find me a little more easily. And I will call on you when we get to you. Another extra thing, if you happen to notice that I react to your question, that means we're coming to you next. And if you could raise your hand, it would help our spotlighter and unmute asker to find you more quickly. So with that out there, I will go to Harold Gress.
Harold, I think you're still muted.
Yes. Oh, wait, no. You're unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
I am so sorry.
There we go.
I tend to forget this. I have an external mic that I mute, and I do this sometimes. I forget to unmute it, so my apologies. So,
Yeah.
but I was saying good afternoon. It's afternoon here, but wherever it is, all over the world. My greetings. I'm actually in Pennsylvania, but I go to well, I'm real close to Maryland. I'm just over the Pennsylvania line. I go to the New Light MCC in Hagerstown.
Nice.
Treasurer, lay delegate. We're a small congregation. We're struggling just like a lot of congregations, but we're hanging in there. We're hanging by a thread, but we're hanging in there because we feel that there's still more work for us to do in Hagerstown. But anyway, back to my, I apologize, back to my question. In your video, you talked about raising funds and how important that is. And so when we hit our congregation meeting, the question from our congregation was, how do you plan to raise those funds? What are the sources that you plan to use?
Great question, Harold, and
we're
thank you
hoping
for
it's
that.
not the local churches because we're giving as much as we can.
Right. And so let me just start by saying, Harold, that I am grateful to every church that continues to live into the covenantal relationship of turning in your assessments to the denomination, because that is so important, especially when your churches are struggling. Harold, as if I were elected moderator, I would want to be present in your church with your pastor and your board to do whatever we could do to help you grow your church. And I love the fact that you are being faithful stewards to your local congregation. That's a beautiful story of faith, and I really appreciate you sharing that. Where do you get the money? Well, there are lots of places to get money, but one thing that's true about just kind of the global economy of philanthropic providers or givers, LGBTQ persons have some of the highest rate of disposable income. And there are networks of those folks. One thing I would tell you, and here in the state of Florida, but it's present in other states too, we have something called Equality Florida. They're one of the champions of LGBTQ rights here in the state. They raise millions of dollars every year just by going out to like-minded stakeholders, where they describe and talk about the mission of their organization, and where that mission is aligned with what is important for the giver, they are quick to write checks. There are any number of those networks that are available to us within MCC. I'm not expecting congregations to pony up, $100,000 or $500,000. The truth is that we can go out to these networks of philanthropic givers and we can collect that money, but it's about knowing how to do that. It's about having done that before. We have a moderator circle, and we tap those folks a lot for cash, and they have been so faithful in their stewardship to MCC. We need to expand that out. We certainly need to continue to have that relationship with those in the moderator circle, but we can expand that out. We can start growing our denomination just by growing the number of folks that are willing to participate with us financially in doing the work that I think MCC is being called to do. And I'll just end this by saying that social justice in our day and age is a hot topic. People are looking for somebody to take the lead. And I believe MCC has a place there.
They're coming to me.
Very good.
Thank
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
question, Howard.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Next, we go to Nancy Baca.
Hi, Nancy.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. Thank you for stepping forward and running. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
With the vision and strengths in your video, have you tried and or been involved with MCC organizations beyond your local community? And along with that, how have you grown to serve on the world platform?
So that's a great question. I appreciate you asking that. I've not served on a global platform before. I certainly have served nationally, especially in my business life. And Nancy, if I could you go back to that first question and maybe refine that for me? Because I want to make sure I really respond to the question.
Sure.
I was asking.
When I've read your stuff, I'm very impressed with everything. I would like to know how have you tried it all to serve our MCC organization beyond your local community? Because this is a big step then.
Yes. And, Nancy, I very much appreciate the the question because it is a big step. I have served and continue to serve as the treasurer of our National Board of Pensions. And I've done that for 3 years, focused on providing to the clergy of the denomination a modest retirement, or maybe a little less than modest, at the time that they end their service to our denomination. I have attempted to serve in other capacities, and continue to want to do whatever I can, as I am called by Spirit to do. I always think it starts there, right? Like, I'm in the moderator race, as it were, because I feel a deep calling by Spirit to participate in this conversation. Somebody asked me the other day, is this a real run, or is this just avoiding, Reverend Elder Cecilia just walking back into the job? I said, no, this is a real run in the sense that the Holy Spirit is calling me to have these conversations. The Holy Spirit is calling me to engage in this process. And I believe that my past experience in leadership certainly does that. I will say that when it comes to leading a national and an international organization, in one sense, leadership is leadership. It's absolutely true that with an international component, it adds layers of complexity, no doubt about it. But it's never going to ever be about just one person. It's always going to be about building the right team. It's going to be about resourcing that team. It's about having a vision that they then can go forward and communicate and engage and resource all of their work. And I have successfully done that multiple times in the various national companies that I have worked with, as well as nationally on the Board of Pensions.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Our next question comes from Reverend Michael Cooper. I'm going to read it. He's at work and can't unmute, which actually kind of goes with the question. When you took the pastorate at St. John's, you did so without a salary, with a commitment to raise it yourself. Do you feel that it is a sustainable model, that is a sustainable model for MCC clergy? As one who forgoed a professional career in my 20s to attend seminary and ordination in MCC, what do you say to those clergy who work hard in parish ministry for a few $100s a month, who may be turned off by your $1 million message?
So I am so grateful for that question. Let me just set the record straight, however. I did not join and become the senior pastor at St. John the Apostle foregoing my salary. I certainly tithe on my salary and more. I did, however, when I became the assistant pastor of MCC Tampa, I raised money to pay for my salary. That said, that is not a workable model for MCC clergy. In fact, part of my plan in raising money calls for helping to support pastors, because talk to any local pastor and here's what they're going to tell you. They could pastor 24/7. And you don't ever get to be a pastor for the money, right? Like, you don't get rich doing this business. The truth is that you do this work because you're called vocationally by an embracing, loving God who makes your life even more joyful by the work. But at the same time, there are economic realities and you have to get paid to do it. And most MCC clergy do not get paid, or do not get paid well enough. It is not my intention, nor would I ever suggest, that clergy need to raise money for themselves to pay for their work in a local church. I think the denomination should step forward and help to bridge the gap between what you are getting paid and what you could get paid. What does the market bear for your area? And give you an opportunity to grow the church so that the church can support you as a pastor and pay you what you rightfully deserve to be paid. I know it seems like I talk about money and raising money a lot, and I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. I talk about that because resourcing our denomination is important. And part of resourcing our denomination is making sure that we have the resources to support our local church. It's not about having a big bank account at the denominational level. It is about making sure that every local church, Howard talked about it a minute ago, his church is struggling. How can the denomination step in and support his church? How can we support Mark in his ministry so that he's not struggling and has to take on a second or even a third job? There are clergy in our denomination internationally, like in Brazil, where they don't get paid at all. We need to be able to create a fund that allows them to do the work of ministry where money is not something they have to worry about.
Lily Rose has a question that's sort of a follow-up.
Hi, I'm Lily Rose. I'm from Northern Lights MCC in the UK. It's sort of two parts, this one. In the slides which you just shared with us, you said about the denomination being funded from US churches. I know as a UK church and an international church, we put money into the denomination.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like that was sort of like a false statement. And just wanted to raise that.
Okay.
But my main question is about, you keep talking about funding and everything in all your candidacy documents and stuff and raising a load of money. Have you got a plan B if you can't get the funding?
Great questions. Let me qualify my statement, Lily. Most of our international churches, because of the complexity of sending money back and forth to the U.S., most of our international churches don't send a lot of money to the U.S. Certainly there is some money exchanged, but the bulk of the money that our denominational staff are paid comes from U.S. churches. Now, that said, I say that only in the sense that if our U.S. churches falter, then the denomination will falter. So let's just be honest about the fact that we've got to make sure that our U.S. churches are supported, are resourced, just like we will do with the international churches. Now, I'll take your second part, which I think is a really great question. I am not one that puts forward a plan that thinks it will fail. So there is a plan B. And part of that plan B involves just scaling back. So if I can't raise $5 million, as an example, what can we do with 4 million or 3.5 million? And there's plenty we can do with $2 million if we can't get to 5 million. But I also approach this topic or this idea with a belief that says the Holy Spirit doesn't call us to do what is not doable. God always provides. There is always a way to achieve a mission. I'm famous for saying there are 50 ways to slice an apple. It may be that pathway A doesn't work. Well, then you go to pathway B. And when it comes to raising money, there are all kinds of ways to do that. Going to local private folk as opposed to asking churches, as Howard was talking about. I would say that if you look at the general milieu of fundraising for the kind of mission that we have, those numbers are very easily attainable. Certainly within the state of Florida, these kinds of organizations like Equality Florida, as I mentioned, that have a focus on LGBTQ social justice, they raise $5 million plus without breaking a sweat. Now, they have a connected network of stakeholders that are intent on making sure that mission is achieved. We can tap into that network and so many more. So I wouldn't have put forward that plan if I didn't think we could get there. And part of leadership is making sure that you hit the goals that you've established. But to your point, if you can't, then what do we do with 3.5 million as opposed to 5? I still think that's a huge shot in the arm for MCC and for the goals that we would set out.
Our next question is from Pastor Kenny Callahan.
Hi, Reverend Craig. Thank you for standing for moderator. You are clearly a passionate visionary spiritual leader, and I appreciate that very much. I also appreciate that you are assertive in your approach. Um, can you share with us some of your spiritual practices and those that are most meaningful for you? And just as I asked Reverend Cecilia yesterday, why should we cast our vote for you to be moderator of MCC?
All right, so so that sounded like three questions, Kenny. So I want to make sure I get them right. My spiritual disciplines and why should you cast your vote? And repeat the second one for me so I make sure I get it.
Okay, you got it. You're right.
Okay, all right. Spiritual disciplines. One, I love reading the Bible, and I spend a great deal of time with our venerated text. There is something that is always moving for me in the layer upon layer of story in the Bible. Uh, I feel a breath of new life. I feel the tingling of the Holy Spirit when I read the Bible, and it is a daily routine for me. Now, sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes, but it's always one of these spirit-led opportunities where I get to just get in touch with God's revelation out of the biblical canon. Another spiritual discipline for me is Lectio Divina, and I particularly do that during Advent and Lent, where I recite a small little section of the biblical text. So, as an example, this past Lent, I used Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Give me the joy of your saving help again, and sustain me with your bounty. Like just even praying that prayer multiple times a day. Whew, you feel God moving in your heart when you do that. So those are a couple of my spiritual practices. Uh, the truth is that for me, I also think it's important that you do some different things. I've started listening to some music. It was fascinating as this webinar was starting. There was a song where the lyric is "Spirit lead me where my faith is without borders." And I sing that song often as a prayer that I lift up. And so, why should you vote for me? I would echo Reverend Elder Cecilia's comments from her town hall yesterday. This is a period of discernment for all of us in MCC, for Reverend Elder Cecilia, for me, and for the body. And I have said from the beginning that if the Holy Spirit moves the body to elect Reverend Elder Cecilia, then that is the movement of God. And if the body is moved and discerns to vote for me, then that is the movement of God. I believe I have a vision that's a little different, and I think is focused on some things that are different than Reverend Elder Cecilia does. I think that growing our churches and doing that in a very particular way is a focus for me. I don't believe that we can continue to lose churches, and we do. And I don't believe that that trajectory is one that we can sustain as a denomination. And when Reverend Elder Cecilia became the moderator, we had 114. Today we have 90. That is not sustainable for us. So one thing I would say is that if the direction and the leadership of the denomination as it currently is something that you particularly connect with, then I would invite that you be in prayer to vote for Reverend Elder Cecilia. And if you think that we need a new spirit, a new season of leadership, then I would invite you to pray that how the Holy Spirit would direct you to vote for me. In the end, who wins in this is MCC. It's not about Reverend Elder Cecilia winning or about me winning, because neither of us are going to win or lose. It's about how is God lifting all of us up to continue to do the work. But I think vision and how you would execute that vision is important. And I think I've laid out a very different strategy, and I encourage everybody to pray about that.
Before we go to our next question, I want to remind people, although this is being live interpreted into 3 languages, others are trying to listen in English, which is not their first language. So if we could speak a simple English for those of us
Sorry.
who are speaking in English, that would be great. Our
My bad.
our next question, I didn't, is not directed at anyone in particular. I know I get going. Our next question comes from Kevin Kunkel.
Hi, I'm pastor in Metropolitan Community Beaches at the Metropolitan Church of the Palm Beaches. And you were my pastor for a little while until the hurricane ran me off. But you did a great job organizing hurricane relief. Really good in the community. Just real quick, our church had an audio-visual system needed to be upgraded. We reached out to a local gay philanthropic organization, and they gave us $20,000, just gave it to us to upgrade. So the money's out there. I do believe what you said. UFMCC is woefully lacking clergy, and
Yes,
especially pastors. Many of our churches go years without a settled pastor. What are your feelings on other paths to ordination that don't require an MDiv? Is my first question. And the second question is, what are your plans to reform the process and recruit clergy and pastors? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. And you're doing a great job over on the East Coast of Florida, and thank you for your service there. Let me say that I have an MDiv. I went to seminary, and I think that that experience is formative and is important. And I also hold space for the fact that there are people that are called to minister who are also not called into spaces of scholarship. I think that we need to create multiple pathways to pastor a church, always thinking about making sure that whoever we put into pastor a church is set up for success. So many times in many denominations, you have people that are thrown into a church who don't have the necessary skill set, education, or resources to do that job and do it well. And in the end, they're hurt and the church is hurt. And that makes no sense. So, how do we create a situation where anybody that feels called into ministry, and let's remember that, ordination and ministry isn't just about my calling, it's also about a community's affirmation of a call, right? But seminary isn't necessarily the end all be all or the only pathway to that. Now, Reverend Elder Cecilia yesterday, in answering a very similar question, suggested that there were some reforms underway. Let me say that part of those reforms, from my viewpoint, also need to include that if you want to go to seminary, but you don't want to take on a huge debt, how can MCC be in a space to say, as an example, after 10 years of service, MCC will pay for your seminary education? But it is also true that some folks, again, aren't called to go to seminary. So how do we make sure that you are armed with all of the resources you need, all of the experience that you need to go in and pastor a church? Again, it doesn't make sense to just grab a pastor off the street and send them into a church and set them up to fail. We need to create a pastoring pathway where churches are going to be supported, where churches are going to grow, because the pastor is set up for success. I think there are lots of ways to do that. The other thing I would say is, I know Reverend Kathy Alexander, who is in charge of our vocational development for the denomination, I know she has a few seminaries that are going to be providing no cost education opportunities, and that's great. But Kevin, your larger point, and I think this is so critical for us, is we don't have enough pastors. When a church goes without a seated pastor for an extended period of time, that church loses congregants and is in a position of possible closure. We can't afford that. Yet, we're not doing anything to go out and recruit clergy. So one of the things I would do is I would set up an opportunity to make sure that we are recruiting clergy. Now, there are lots of ways to do that. Listen, There are folks, and I know this from my own seminary experience, there are folks that land in seminary from a different denomination, and when they hear about MCC, because sadly they'd never heard of MCC before, when they hear about us, they're like, that's the denomination I would love to serve in. There are lots of folks like that we could get to be clergy in MCC, but we just have to find ways to connect with them, and we've made no effort to do that, at least not that I'm aware of. The other thing I would say is that there are people within MCC's system. There's a young man in my own church who, after having attended this church for literally 3 months, set up an appointment with me to say, Reverend Craig, I think I'm called to be a pastor. Yes. Now this is a young late 20s young man, but he felt the call because he was here. I think we can build up a lot of clergy simply by filling our churches with young people. But we have to go out to young people, and I've addressed that in some of the other webinars and in our written material. We have to get young people to come back into our churches. It's no surprise to anybody that MCC is an aging congregation, with the exception of Lily Rose, who is in Europe, and God love that young person for going to church and participating. You know, our churches are aging. We've got to engage in a new level of generational leadership within MCC. And if we don't do that, then really there's not much, our denomination is not going to be set up for success. So how do we do that? Well, I even said this in my written material, and I know this seems tangential or off topic, but I just want to briefly mention this. How many of us in MCC know that we own the website Jesus.com? Now, if you want to talk about a way to connect with young people, you get a billboard in a targeted market that's black with a rainbow that says Jesus.com, and talk about inclusivity. And then you match that up with something on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. You will drive young people to really get connected about knowing that MCC exists and then getting some of them to show up at your church. That's one of many ways that we can get young people. We are the younger people today, the 20s and 30 somethings, they are driven by technology. And we all see it. Like you go out to dinner and everybody's on their phone, like they don't even talk to one another, right? We need to connect with them where they enter the process. So using technology in a formidable way is one way we can do that. And then once you get young people in church, some of them, just like the congregant here, are going to feel the call of God to go and serve.
Thank you. Next we go to Lewis. I always say this wrong. Is it Ray?
Yeah, that'll do.
I will learn it.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Reverend Craig. I'm based in Edinburgh and a part of the Our Tribe ministry in Scotland. And my question is, how will you support growing churches outside the US, for example, in Brazil, Mexico, and across Africa?
Great question. Thank you, Lewis. I'll start by saying, and I would encourage you to read some of the written material that Reverend Elder Cecilia and I have provided. And I know the link is in the chat because I answer some of that question there. Let me just take Brazil as an example. We're doing some amazing things in Brazil. We've created connection and community that never existed before. We've lifted up our trans siblings and provided safe spaces for them. And all of that's great. I just don't think it's enough. And I think that one thing we do is we take the leadership in Brazil and we say, what do we need to do to go to the next step? It's never about, for me, it's never about imposing an American idea onto Scotland or Africa or Brazil. It's about going to those local leaders who know the context of their area better than I will ever know it, better than, frankly, Reverend Elder Cecilia would know it. We don't live there. They do. They know that area. They know that environment. Let's go there and say, what do you need? How do you envision growing in this area? There are things that they will think of that would have never passed my mind because I don't live there. It's not my context, but it is theirs. So how do we engage them in the effort? It starts, I think, with a simple proposition. We're here, we're present, and we want to do whatever we need to do to help you grow in this area. What do you need? How do we help you grow? If you have needs that aren't being met, how can we meet them? If you want to have a brainstorming session, let's bring in some people to brainstorm how we explode this church, how we grow this church monumentally in your area. How do we connect areas of Brazil or Mexico or Africa in ways that they're not connected now? Let me use also Africa as an example. My fiance is from Zimbabwe. I'm connected to that continent. And, if you think about the continent of Africa, it is a collection of very different cultures that have very different value systems. And almost all of them will name LGBTQ people as illegal people. They will put LGBTQ people to death. And that is written into their culture. And yet we have churches in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, of all places, where you literally are at risk of your life for claiming your truth. Part of, I think, how we can help grow churches is mirroring what we've done in Brazil, creating safe spaces for those folks to come into a community of worship and to be in a space where they know they're safe worshiping God and naming and claiming who they are and the beauty of who they are and God created them to be. I think in Mexico, I know Reverend Elder Hector is doing some amazing work there. We need to continue to do in Mexico what we're doing in Brazil and Africa and even in Europe. Every continent has its own context. It begins with listening deeply to what they need and then providing the leadership to make sure that they get it.
Thank you. I'm reading the next question, but before I do, I want to make sure that Reverend Craig, you saw the message I sent you very quickly.
Yes.
Okay. This came in from someone who, we have a few people who aren't able to speak, and they're showing up as iPhone. So I don't know the name. How can we reclaim our edgy spirituality?
It's a great question. We, at the beginning of MCC, at the beginning of our history, when Reverend Elder Troy Perry did the courageous work of forming MCC, we were the vanguard of spirituality in the United States. We just did it differently. And we led the way. The truth is, if we are honest about the religious spaces across the world, churches that are open and affirming today are because MCC led the way. What do we do to recapture that? Well, part of what we do to recapture that is we just listen deeply to where God is calling us. One example that I've used, and the moderator nominating committee and I had a long talk about this actually. Today, trans rights are under attack like never before. And within MCC, we're doing a lot of great work in supporting our trans siblings, as we should. But I don't think it's enough, because the people that operate in a trans space and that are also connected to MCC, that's a very small number compared to the overall population of trans folks. Where are we to reach out to them? When we talk about reforming and retooling and reconnecting to a profound prophetic spirituality, part of it is about reconnecting to our social justice roots. We got to go out from the rooftop and shout that our trans siblings, they are beloved by God and they are welcome in our churches. Well, we're not doing that in large measure. I think we should be on every TV show in every continent to shout that message. I think we need to be the go-to resource when it comes to anything that's religious or anything that's LGBTQ centered. People need to be calling us to say, would you come on our television show or our radio show, or our podcast? Would you be quoted for this print publication and talk about that? The other thing, and this is one of the things I love about MCC, of the many things I love about MCC, within each church, it's the worship service, the space is driven by the community. You don't go into any MCC church that it's the same as any other. And I love that. I think that is just so brilliant. There are churches that want to just explode with these ideas about a new spirituality, but that does take a leadership from the denomination to provide. And part of that is really honing in on stop trying to be like every other church, because that's a stale and a stoic religiosity that is driving people away from church. Instead, let's talk about some of the cores of MCC. How about radical hospitality? How about inclusivity? How about an open table? How about a spirituality where we all gather together? Not all of us believe the same thing, and yet we come together as a community to worship an amazing, loving God. Those are the things that really separate us from everybody else and create an opportunity for us to deeply connect with the power of God in our lives. Those are things I think that begin the process of reclaiming our unique spiritual space.
Thanks. We're getting quite a few questions on fundraising and finances, and I'm trying to get them all in and balance them with some of the other ones. Next, we're going to go to Carolyn Mobley Boo. How can I say Carolyn Mobley Bowie?
Greetings, everyone. I am delighted to be on this particular webinar. And Pastor Craig, I just want to ask one question that's been rattling my brain. I love that you are able to raise money and you have a good history of that. And I hope that you can duplicate that in terms of teaching us who are in local churches and emerging ministries how to do what you do. So my question was written out. Will you, if you're, and even if you're not elected moderator, I hope you'll consider it, find a way to reach out to all of those churches that want to learn how to do better fundraising, to tap the communities you're talking about, so that every congregation can be better helped with in terms of its income. Please.
Can I just say, I love your spirit. Your energy just shines in that in the video. I just thank you so much for that question. I would be happy to teach and train anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about how to do the kind of fundraising I'm talking about. And the truth is that in every state in the US and in the world. Now, I can speak a little bit to the European context. I'm a little less educated about the Mexico or the South American context. But I can tell you that if you have the right message in front of the right people and it's communicated with clarity, there's no problem about getting the money. Here's the one key. You have to be willing to do the ask. I've seen so many people. I was in a room with the president of a seminary who was surrounded by literally multiple millionaires who talked bravely about the work of the seminary and why they needed money, but he failed to do one thing. He failed to say, can I have a check for $100,000? And as a result, he walked out of that meeting with no money. You have to be ready to ask for the money. And connecting with these networks actually isn't that hard. It's actually pretty easy. So send me an email. I'm happy to help any congregation to do that.
Okay, I am reading our next question. It is from Claire Coughlin. I just lost it, sorry. If you know where there's money and how to get it, and you feel this is a need for UFMCC, why have you not helped connect with those sources before now? Also, if you are elected, how will you balance your stated goal of traveling to every church along with the, how will you balance your stated goal of traveling to every church along with the need for administrative work and focus of guiding the denomination?
Part A of that question. By the way, Reverend Dr. Tijuana, I hope you noticed I've slowed down so that translators can keep up. I am amazed at the work of the interpreters that are doing this space. So thank you for all of your efforts. Let me start with the money. So when you go out into these stakeholder groups, here's what you don't do. You don't say, would you give me money for someone else? Because that doesn't work. People want to give money to a cause and a vision that is specific to the person asking. So leaders are the ones that ask. In the earlier example I just gave, it was the president of a seminary that was doing the asking. They had a development coordinator. That person could have done it, but it's always the top tier of folks that do the ask, because people that are going to shell out $100,000 or $200,000 or $500,000, they want an audience with the person that's actually directing how the money is going to be used. So as moderator, I could do that. I can't do that for, if Reverend Elder Cecilia was elected, I couldn't do that for her. Now, what I could do is I could do that with her. I could teach her how to do that in ways that maybe she hasn't had the experience or the skill set, but and I would be happy to do that with her. When it comes to the local congregation, the question that was just asked, uh, the difference there is that you're not asking on an international level, you're asking for your local church. So you are the authority, you are the top dog in asking for your local church. And I'm happy to help any church that wants to learn how to do that better, to do that better. And part of it is just modeling. You want me to go with you and make a pitch for why somebody should give your local MCC $20,000? I mean, Kevin Conkle was just on talking about a local LGBTQ group that gave his church $20,000 for new AV equipment. All he did was make the ask, because he is the leader of that church, was connecting a vision and a need, and he asked for the money and he got it. It's a standard formulary for that space. Let me talk about traveling for a little bit. It may seem like the traveling piece would be challenging, and to a certain degree will be, but my plan would simply be that I would hop on a plane on a Friday afternoon. I would land where I was going to land, try to have dinner with the senior pastor. Then the next day on Saturday, meet with the senior pastor and the board and any other folks from the church that would want to meet, talk about where they're at, what they're doing, what their vision is, how are they growing, what help do they need, what resources do they need, attend worship with them on Sunday, get on a plane on Sunday afternoon, fly home, take Monday off because you have to have some good self-care. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, it's very standard for me, and you can ask anybody who knows me, 12 to 15-hour days is a pretty standard work day for me. And I just kind of become accustomed to that. It's my normal. So those kinds of days, those are pretty standard. Now, the other part of this is, and again, this is, I think, a difference in leadership. I don't need to be involved in every single thing. Leadership isn't about having your finger on the pulse of absolutely everything that's happening in an organization. It is about building a leadership team and trusted colleagues that are going to do the work. You check in to be sure, you engage, you lead, you talk about plans, you have visions, you have those conversations, but it's not about being a micromanager on top of everything. For me, when I've led organizations, and I've led organizations with hundreds of people, uh, you lead those organizations by trusting the team that you build. And that's something I think that's very easy to do. It's something that I've found easy to do. And in the end, and let's always remember, we talk a lot about money, but there's a business element to church, but we should never forget that we're a church first. We're doing the work of Jesus Christ first. That's always going to be first and foremost. And so bringing in a spirituality to that leadership is critical. It's something that I've done here at St. John the Apostle. I've done it in multiple spaces. And so traveling isn't going to be that big of a deal. in terms of my schedule and my time. And by the way, it's amazing what you can do on a 2 or 3 hour plane ride and how many emails you can answer.
Our next question, I think we have time for two more, is from Tony.
Can you hear me now?
Now, Tony, we sounded like we're on a cell phone commercial. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Well, Craig, many of the U.S. mainline denominations have considerable endowments and deep pockets and resources and have still continued to decline for decades. So what is it about MCC that's going to break that mold, that's going to be different? If we had the resources, how is it going to be different? How are we going to buck the trend?
Great question, Tony. One thing that's true about a lot of those mainline denominations is that they don't use their endowment to support churches. They depend on their regional geography, like a diocese. The local bishop will decide how resources are told out. In MCC, I think because we are such a different polity, the way we structure and do church is so different. I think that it becomes a very easy proposition for us. And also because we don't have hundreds and thousands of churches. We have 90 churches in the US and 20 plus churches internationally. It becomes very easy for us to manage a process that says, hey, Tony, what do you need in your church? How can we be of support? And it's not always about money. Sometimes you need board training. Sometimes you need a pastor who just needs to take a break. How can we provide some pulpit supply for that pastor? Sometimes you just need help. Listen, we're thinking about buying a building, or we're thinking about selling our building, or we're thinking about a new lease space. Is there somebody that can help us navigate that? There are all kinds of ways that the denomination can be present in supporting churches. Relative to finances, I've laid out a few of those examples. And those aren't problems for other churches, by and large. If you go to an Episcopal, a Presbyterian, a Lutheran, a Methodist church, either that church supports a very hefty salary, or their local diocese or synod or regional structure is providing resources for that pastor so that that person can be a pastor. Now, sometimes they have to pastor 2 or 3 churches if there's a broad range of geography. We don't do that, and we should. And I think it's important for us to do that. I think our pastors need to be supported in a profound way. And if we're not doing it, nobody else is going to do it, unlike what is done in other areas. And I think it's critical that we start supporting our clergy in that way.
Now we'll go to JT Pryor.
Hey, Reverend Craig. So I just wanted to open and say that in my own seminary, I started in the fall, and whenever I have conversations about MCC and our theology, what you talked about earlier on this call is so true, because people lean in and they get curious, and I think they get a little bit jealous because we're so free theologically. But that's not my question. I just wanted to raise it up. But it seems like our digital ministry and presence on social media is lacking when you look at MCC compared to other progressive denominations. So what do you see as MCC's strengths in digital content creation, and how would you implement those into a plan? That's my Gen Z representation for MCC today.
Thank you, JT, for the question. And I'm grateful for the fact that you are a young person that is in seminary. You are exactly the model of what we need within MCC across the country and across the world. So thank you so much for leaning into your call to service. I don't think we have done a great job in digital ministry. I think that, as an example, if you look at MCC's TikTok feed, it's largely graphics. That's not going to trip the trigger of young people. They want to see live action short video. They want to see that 10, 20, 30-second spot that will capture their attention and cause them to go into a call of action. So click on a link to learn more kind of thing. I don't think that we are broad in our reach across multiple platforms. So yes, we have a minor TikTok presence, but if you look at TikTok, and as my fiance will tell you, I love watching TikTok. Most of TikTok is some engagement. It's inviting you with some kind of a pull, some kind of a way to connect you, right? So it could be a profound statement. As an example, you could on a TikTok feed say, why is it that the church thinks it should be the gatekeepers of God's grace, not MCC? Click to learn more. Something that simple, right? Causes people to think, it captures their attention, it causes them to get curious, and they move on into learning more about us. We don't do that well, I don't think, and I don't think we do it across a broad range of platforms. And if I were moderator, I would certainly put forward a great deal of effort. In fact, I would do some of those videos myself because I think I do that fairly well. And the other thing I would say is that we need to create an opportunity. Like when I talk about resourcing churches, if you don't have somebody in your local church context that knows how to do social ministry, how can we provide you that resource, right? How do we teach you? There is always somebody in a church that loves to be on Facebook or YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or any of those other platforms. How do we teach you how to do that so you can create opportunities in your own local church setting? We need to have a resource bank for that. So many of those kinds of ideas. I think that if we're going to capture the younger generations, again, we've got to go to where they enter the process, and that's technology.
Thank you, Reverend Craig. Thank you for everyone who participated in this webinar. I neglected last night to thank all of the staff, IT tech people who are behind the scenes making this work. That does not mean I don't appreciate you. It's just there's a lot of moving pieces and I'm trying to remember everything. But we're collecting all the questions. I don't have an exact plan for what's going to happen to the unanswered ones at this point because we're into the preparation leading up for the forum and the meeting, and I can only ask the candidates for so much of their, but know that we're getting them. If you had a question that was not asked and or answered tonight, I encourage you to go and check out the previous webinars if you haven't yet, and the printed document or the PDF, I think it's a PDF now in the resource directory. All those links are in the chat. If Kim would, sorry, it's my cat's dinner time. If Kim, if you wouldn't mind, Kim, oh there, Kim is dropping all those links again into the chat for your reference. There will be time for a Q&A at the business forum, which is next Saturday. I encourage you all to attend that as well. Thank you, Tammy. See all the stuff you see me doing, there's like 90 times as much happening behind the scenes. If you haven't already planned to be there, mark your calendars. We'll have both candidates there. Once again, thank you, Reverend Craig, for sharing tonight, for giving of your time, for participating in this whole process. I want to say to everyone, until we meet again, God be with you, and good night, good morning, good afternoon. God bless.